Hello and welcome to another edition of Y-PAC Check-Ins. I'm your host, Sean Davido, and today I'm joined by Randy Beehler, the Public Affairs and Communications Director for the City of Yakima. Thank you for joining me today, Randy.
Thanks, Sean. It's been a while.
Yes, it has, and a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on in the city. I want to first start out with some additions to the city. We have a new assistant city manager. Can you talk a little bit about her and tell us just some information about who she is and where she comes from?
Yeah, the new assistant city manager who started for the city on May 2nd is Rosalind Oglesby. And Rosalind has more than 16 years of experience in local government. She spent most of that time in Portsmouth, Virginia. She served in a variety of roles there, including as an assistant to the city manager and then actually as an assistant city manager for several years. She left Portsmouth in the middle of last year, and we're fortunate to have her join our team in the first week of May. She'll be in charge of a number of different initiatives and programs for the city, not the least of which include economic development. She'll have some oversight of the Yakima Airport and a variety of other things. That position of assistant city manager is kind of a, if you make a baseball analogy, it's kind of like a utility player. They need to have a variety of skills and will be called on to work in a variety of areas. So it's not someone who necessarily is a specialist in a particular given field, but somebody who can lead projects, serve as a project manager, also provide oversight of departments and divisions. And Rosalind has this really nice skill set that fits right into that role. That position actually has been unfilled for many, many years here in the city. It was originally taken out of the budget in like 2012, I believe was the first year that it was not funded. It was briefly filled for about a year and a half, 4 or 5 years ago, but most of the time since the decade, really 10 years, that position has not been filled due to funding challenges for the city, but having Rosalind join the team is really important and will be really helpful.
Wonderful. I have not had a chance to meet her yet, but I look forward to that. And hopefully we can get her to come on the program and visit with us.
Hopefully, yeah, I'm sure she'd be more than willing to do that.
Wonderful. A lot of other stuff going on. Let's talk about parks and Miller Park renovation. Some big stuff going on out there. I've been out there a couple times. Tell us a little bit about that. I talked to Ken Wilkinson recently about some of that stuff, and they've added a playground and some other things. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project?
So actually the effort to renovate Miller Park started a couple of years ago, and it was really, sometimes I think this term gets overused, but this is one of those instances where it's absolutely appropriate. It was a grassroots effort. This came from community members, some who still live in the northeast part of Yakima, but others who used to live there, others who were born and raised there throughout their childhood, live now in other parts of Yakima, but still have fond memories of Miller Park. It's actually the first designated neighborhood park in the city of Yakima. Maybe people who are not from here, maybe even people from here, don't recognize that part of Yakima, that southeast and northeast part of Yakima, that's really where Yakima started, particularly the neighborhoods of Yakima started. And Miller Park has always been and continues to be a major community gathering place. Last year, the Parks Department, the Parks and Recreation Division, took over operation of what's called the Washington Fruit Community Center. It used to be the city's senior center, and has really revived energy into that facility, offering a number of programs for kids and also for families and for seniors. So Miller Park just kind of becomes an extension of Washington Fruit Community Center and vice versa. So a couple of years ago, these community members said, hey, we need to make some improvements here to Miller Park. And they worked tirelessly to secure local private funding, also some funding from the Washington State Legislature. And what has been put in so far at Miller Park is, as you mentioned, a new playground. It's great. It's a wonderful playground. Also, the basketball courts there have been resurfaced. Soon, there will be lighting for the basketball courts installed. There will be for lack of a better term, gazebo, but it's not so much a gazebo as it is a performance facility. There will be walking trails through the park, and also seating in the park benches and the like. So it's really becoming refreshed and renewed, and will continue to play that role in that neighborhood that it's always played as this major community gathering spot.
And I was out there, like I say, just the other day, and there are more lights. They put up more lighting just in the park area there. Right. I've noticed more lighting for more safety, to make residents and park goers feel more safe.
Absolutely. That's one of the challenges in areas, particularly parks, is that when it gets dark, sometimes there are folks in the parks that shouldn't be there because our parks close at 10 p.m., but also that can pose some safety risks. And so with that increased lighting is one of the most valuable improvements that can be made in an area like that. At your home or at your business, the same thing. Keeping an area lit tends to keep any nefarious activity away from those areas.
Absolutely. We've got a lot of stuff to touch on, so I want to keep us moving forward. Major road projects, public works, it's that time of year. We're getting diverted all over the place. There's a lot of road work going on. Roads are closed. Repaving is going on, a lot of work. Talk about that and some of the big ones that are happening and have happened already.
Well, before we talk about specific projects, I'll mention it to you and to the folks who are watching, something that I not a lot of people know about, apparently, and that is during the wintertime, asphalt plants, the facilities that actually produce asphalt, close down in this part of the country. It's simply too cold during the wintertime for them to operate. So we don't see much road work being done in the wintertime. So when the weather starts to warm up, as you mentioned, boy, we start to see a lot of activity on our roads. A couple of bigger projects that are happening. There's a project on Nob Hill, a whole section of Nob Hill that is getting redone. And that, like most major road projects, it does cause some disruption, but that disruption is temporary. For many, many years, I've lived in Yakima my entire lifetime, and for many years, there wasn't a lot of major road work going on. And so maybe we got a little bit distanced from or spoiled by the fact that we weren't having to take detours. We weren't having to be inconvenienced temporarily. But a lot of work's been done on roads in the last few years, in part because of the passage of the Transportation Benefit District, the TBD. That's the $20 fee that we pay on our license tabs each year. That goes to help fund projects and allows the city to have, it's kind of, so for big infrastructure projects, we have to borrow money. We don't have money just sitting around. It's kind of like, the best analogy that I've found to make is, it's like buying a car or a house. We don't have the money sitting around to just go and purchase a house. You have to take a loan out. You take your mortgage out. It's the same thing with infrastructure projects. As a guarantee for you taking out your mortgage, the lenders need to be certain that there's a stable source of revenue to repay that loan. And in the case of major infrastructure projects for the city, the loan, the mortgage, is what we call a bond. And so the funding stream to repay that loan, to guarantee that loan can be repaid, is that $20 car tab fee. So that allows us to actually do larger projects over a longer period of time. So that's part of why we're seeing more road projects in the last year, a couple of years, and particularly this year, than maybe we have seen over the last decade or so. But that project on Nob Hill is a major one. We're also coming up on the season where the city will start doing what's called sealing, the
crack sealing.
Crack sealing. No, well, not just crack sealing, but it's sealing all the roads. So crack sealing.
Seal coating.
Seal coating.
Yes.
And it's the crack seal is particular to those areas where you see the asphalt separating. That's filled with a combination of materials that allow a little bit of expansion and contraction.
And that's where they have the little wand and they're out there and you can see them filling in just the cracks to maintain the current roadway, right?
Correct, because what also happens in Yakima that I guess not a lot of people are aware of is a freeze and thaw cycle. So asphalt is inherently porous. It just does. It separates. It's got little crevices in the asphalt. As water from snow or rain or ice fall gets down in there and freezes, it expands. It cracks the asphalt. Then as it melts, it contracts, and you get this kind of almost a heaving action, and that's what causes potholes. That's why we see this time of year a lot of potholes out there, and that's a major effort that that our crews are undertaking right now, are filling those potholes. And people can really help us out a lot by going on Y-PAC, reporting potholes, because we only have so many people to identify where those potholes are. And the more eyes that are out there letting us know that through Y-PAC, the faster we can get those potholes filled. Absolutely. But that seal coating project, you're going to start seeing that around town. And that's a major way to maintain the current roadway so that it has a longer lifespan.
Right. I was just out on Yakima Avenue recently. They took about 2 inches of asphalt out. I think that was not a complete grind and overlay, but they took the top surface off and laid down new roadway, correct?
Yes, and that's actually the definition of a grind and overlay. The grind and overlay is you take that, as you said, about 2 inches, a little bit more than that, of asphalt off the top and replace it. A complete rebuild of the road would actually involve going down into the base. Underneath the asphalt, there's aggregate rock that forms this base for the actual roadway. And then you have several inches of asphalt on top, unless we're talking about a concrete roadway, which those are rather uncommon around here. But for the asphalt roadways, that is a way to preserve the lifespan or extend the lifespan of roadway 2 and asphalt roadways, to do that grind and overlay every now and again.
Absolutely. Okay, let's keep moving here. We've got other stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
2-year city budget cycle. I am not very familiar with this, so I'm going to let you take the lead here and just fill me in on what is the 2-year budget cycle and what are we talking about and what does it mean to you?
You know, I recognize too that talking about budget for most people is not exactly the most exciting thing, but it is absolutely, obviously critical to the operation of any organization, including a city. Our total annual budget, of course, varies each year, but it's in the neighborhood of $230 million, something like that. So we're talking about a large corporation, municipal corporation here operating. And for the history of the city of Yakima, as far back as we know anyway, the city has always operated on an annual budgeting basis. Our it's called the fiscal year, is the same as the calendar year. A lot of government entities, particularly local government in Washington state and elsewhere, operate on a 2-year budget cycle. The Washington state legislature operates on a 2-year budget cycle. And by doing that, it helps to ensure some predictability. It helps to lessen the amount of time. Just for example, for an annual budget process, easily invested in that staff time is 6 to 8 months. You're just preparing that budget for the next year for most of the prior year. So by budgeting for a 2-year cycle, we'll actually reduce some of that extra work that has to go in to budget on an annual cycle. Some people may think, though, but then you're locking yourself in for 2 years to this budget. Well, that's not true. That's not what budgeting is. Budgeting is anticipating how much income, how much revenue you may have, and then designing how you will expend that money. But budgeting is a constant, ongoing effort, constantly watching to see that those revenues are in fact coming in at the rate you expected. Maybe they're coming in a little bit lower. You have to make adjustments. If they're coming in higher, that's always a good thing, but you need to make adjustments. Adjustments are made all the time, constantly throughout budgeting. It is not a set in concrete sort of a process or set in concrete animal. It's this dynamic, constantly moving process to continue to evaluate how your budget is doing. But that 2-year budgeting cycle helps to actually make the process a little bit clearer, a little bit easier, a little bit more understandable. And as I mentioned, creates that predictability.
And gives you a little bit of time to vet things, I would guess. Just you can
True.
you can take a deeper look at things.
True. And, oftentimes throughout the time I've worked for the city, I'll get questions from reporters, questions from family members, friends about, well, what happens if you guys, for example, what if you go over budget on something like snow removal? Will you stop removing snow? No, we're not going to stop removing snow. We'll keep doing that work, but we have to put more money into that particular effort. That means we don't do something else. Maybe we don't build that new storage shed at the Public Works facility this year. Maybe that waits till next year. It's very, very similar, more complicated, obviously, but it's very similar to how each and every one of us budget at home. We make choices about how we spend our money based on the expenses that come our way, the unexpected expenses. A transmission goes out, a hot water heater blows. Well, we didn't budget for that in our family budget this year, but we got to pay that. And so you just make adjustments.
Yeah. There is a lot of detail that goes into that. Yes. I know there's a lot of work that goes into that, and there's a good reason to move in that direction, it seems like.
For sure. It is a more streamlined way of managing money.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on to something I know a little bit more about. I am involved. I've been helping document a little bit of the Millennium Plaza. They're restoring parts of it. Can you talk about that? I know quite a bit about that because I've been involved with it. So tell our viewers about what's going on.
Well, I think it's probably fair to say that you probably know more about it than I actually do. But the Millennium Plaza was built as part of the celebration of the millennium. And it was designed by a very well-known artist. And the concept behind it was great. There was a foundation that was formed to help support that piece of art and other public art in Yakima. But there were some design flaws, frankly, that weren't taken into account at the time. And it is unfortunate that those flaws, if you will, were the cause of, or were discovered because of vandals. Yeah. Because we didn't anticipate, or it wasn't anticipated that somebody would actually damage that public art. But that is in fact what happened. Many of the artifacts that were stored in these behind glass in the containers down there, well, the glass was broken and the artifacts were stolen over time, which is it's disheartening, and it's a bit hard to believe that somebody would do that. But it is in fact what has happened. And over time, that the facility has really begun to show its age. So an effort has been undertaken with the help of some very talented and knowledgeable folks in town to help restore not only the artifacts, but the overall plaza itself. When it's done, I think people are going to be very pleased. They'll see this renewed, refreshed facility that has become an important part of our community for sure.
Yeah, just a few of the things we have tested. We were actually testing new glass. That's one of the projects that I was involved in, was testing the glass that will be in those windows. And believe me, it will be plenty strong. And it is, like you said, it's disheartening that some of that stuff was taken, but they are doing a great job trying to restore the pieces that were in there. Some of them won't be able to be recreated because there just isn't any record of them. But they do have some record of them and some photos. If anyone does have close-up pictures of any of those windows, send them to me at sean.davido@yakimawa.gov, because we would like to see them. I know I can get them to the right people who would like to recreate those. The ones that can't be recreated will be filled with other new artwork from the community. And it's a great project. I'm working with Andy Granito, who is doing a lot of the work. They've already done some work. They've refinished some benches. They're redoing bubblers, and they have put notices in the windows that they are working on restoring it. And it sounds like they are going to have a quite a thing for the anniversary, which will be Wonderful. 2023, I believe. And so that's what I'm working on for everybody's information, for your information too. So, we do want to talk about some of the other things. YPD has a new flock camera system. I want to talk about that, and it was involved in a recent incident also that you want to give some information about. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, first, just in general, the flock cameras, this is something that, this is a system that's been around for a few years now and has been adopted across the country in cities and towns and counties. What the flock system does is they're small cameras that can be located in various locations. In the city of Yakima right now, there are about 20 of these cameras. And what they do is they read license plates. They are able to look at the backs of vehicles. They do not capture the driver. We don't know who the driver is. That's not data that's collected by these cameras. It's just the backs of cars. And one of the things that they are most helpful in is identifying potential stolen vehicles. Almost instantaneously, if a flock camera captures the license plate or the back end of a suspected stolen vehicle, almost instantaneously, that information is provided to police officers, who then are able to create a plan to have a strong response, a large personnel response. Why that's important is because in the past, an officer might be driving along the road, see a car that they suspect is a stolen vehicle, and then go try and stop that vehicle on their own, one officer. With the help of the flock cameras, a plan can be developed, a large show of force can be put together so that the likelihood of an arrest is much higher, of apprehension is much higher. It actually, probably about 6-8 weeks ago, it played a major role in finding and locating a man who was suspected of having kidnapped and raped a 6-year-old girl. And very, very, very quickly, the police identified that vehicle, came up with the plan for a strong response, and were able to apprehend that suspect. One of the instances here just recently, it was late at night and almost midnight, and the flock camera system identified a potential stolen vehicle, sent that data almost instantaneously to officers. A plan was developed. The officers responded up by North First Street, Bartlett Street, and the driver jumped out of the vehicle, began to flee on foot, and turned around and fired at police officers. Police officers returned fire, did strike the suspect, but the suspect still would not comply with officers' orders and continued to try and flee as best as he could. Less lethal force was used at that point in the form of beanbag shots. And even then, the beanbag shots, by the way, they generally speaking are not going to cause life-threatening injuries, but they hurt. They hurt a lot. And usually that's enough to get somebody to comply. In this case, it wasn't. Finally, a canine dog, Trex, was deployed, and that worked. The suspect complied. But what's kind of concerning about that particular incident is that in the last year or so, there have been 4 incidents where Yakima police officers have actually been shot at by suspects. Unlike television programs, the impression you might get from television programs, that is an uncommon experience for police to be shot at. The fact that there have been 4 of those incidents in the last year is concerning to police. Obviously, it's concerning to police that hesitance to fire at officers seems to have lessened, at least for whatever reason. And certainly the trend will go up and down and up and down. But the fact that there are these abilities out there for police to use less lethal methods is really important, given this kind of increase that we've seen in people willing to shoot at officers.
And like you say, this isn't a common thing.
No.
It's pretty alarming that this is happening in our community, and that people are willing to not comply and shoot back, literally shoot back at a police officer. And it goes beyond what it's hard for me to even fathom.
Yeah.
That.
and I also think that what the average person out there may not take into account is the effect that has on officers themselves, but also on their families. That increased potential risk. That there, of course, you're always at risk as a police officer, but those incidents that have happened in consecutively here over the last year or so really heightens that concern and fear in police officers and their families.
And we definitely want all of our officers to come home safe every day, every time they go out. Now, there was another incident recently that involved police with an accident that affected the airport tower. Can you talk a little bit about that and just give some information about what the long-term effects are that to the airport tower? It's a federal installation, right?
That's correct. The tower itself is actually owned by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. It's not owned by the airport, operated by the FAA. And that the incident that occurred was a car accident where the car made contact with the tower after having made contact at a very high rate of speed with a couple of large electrical transformer boxes. The damage that was done to the tower by the car running into it appears, at this point anyway, to be irreparable. It doesn't appear that actually can be repaired. There's structural beams inside that tower, and the impact that was caused by the vehicle crashing into it was enough to bend the structural beams inside the tower. And it's not right now, it can't be occupied. The FAA has said no, it can't. Nobody can be in that building. And so what's happened temporarily, it happened 2 days after the incident. There's a temporary control trailer, I guess is the best term. It's not a tower. And if it's located just west of the terminal building, out on the apron behind the security fences, kind of there's a Castle coffee stand. Just if you look just south of that, you'll see some trucks and a trailer. That is a completely adequate control mechanism for the airport. And now it's not 100% certain exactly how the airport moves forward with air traffic control, but what is likely to happen is that the air traffic control tower will need to be replaced. And that could be a process that takes 2, maybe even 3 years. Likely also will be paid for primarily anyway, by the FAA. And one of the interesting side notes to what's happening here is that there is some consideration being given to reactivating the old tower, the tower that sat on top of the terminal building. You can still see it there. It's this, I don't know if it's octagonal or if it's a pentagon shape, but you'll see it on top of the air terminal building. I remember as a kid when
I'll show a picture of it.
Yeah.
You can see it on the screen right here.
Yeah. And it operated for many, many, many years. What is a little bit stunning to me, and it probably is to everybody who's lived here for a long time, is the tower that was damaged is nearly 50 years old. Just doesn't seem like it's been here that long. I still think of it as kind of the new tower there, but it's very important to the operation of the airport, and it's critical for the operation of commercial flights. There are airports that are not controlled. They are called uncontrolled airspace airports, and but for commercial flights, they need more data that can be gathered than from just pilots talking to one another, which is what happens at an uncontrolled airport. That's what happened for a couple of days at the Yakima airport. Commercial flights weren't allowed, but the private pilots were able to talk to one another on the same frequency on the radios to let the other pilots know their intentions. But that is only kind of a short-term fix. And as I said, is not really an acceptable fix for commercial flights. So we have the temporary tower in place now. The FAA is developing a longer-term plan, which likely will include replacing the tower, and maybe an interim plan, which could include reviving the old tower. At least on the short term, in the short term.
We've talked about a lot of stuff. I want to touch back on parks. We're going to lighten this thing up back at the end. I know the Parks and Recreation Summer Guide has come out. So can you talk just a little bit about that? Great things happening in the parks all summer long. Weather's getting better, and we've got some good things to look forward to.
Well, as we are all aware, the last couple of years, there just hasn't been much going on from a recreation standpoint. And we're still being cautious. We're still on the being wary of COVID and what effect it may have on recreational activities. But this year, for the first time in 2 full summers, activity is ramping back up in the parks, including some what have been very popular musical events at Franklin Park, also at Miller. We were talking about Miller earlier. Viva la Musica is a very popular musical program series over the summertime at Miller Park. And of course, all sorts of sports leagues that are taking place during the summer. So check out that summer Parks and Rec guide. You can get a hard copy of it if you want. Of course, you can find it on the Parks and Recreation webpage and see what all there is to do this summer in our parks.
Well, that's some good stuff, Randy. It's good that some of those parks activities are coming back. It has been an interesting couple years lately. So I appreciate all of your time. We have talked a whole bunch today. So I appreciate you coming on and visiting with me, and I look forward to visiting with you again.
Well, it's great that we get an opportunity every now and again to just update people on a few things that are out there and maybe being talked about. And then folks can find out a little bit more information through these interviews. So it's really appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us today.